All right, you're live. All right. Good morning, OzCon. Glad you guys are here. 10:30 on a Sunday morning. So yeah, woo, yeah. So one talk Golden Age comics, and I'm not old enough to have been around for Golden Age comics. I only know them by proxy, so I know I may look old, but I'm not that old. I grew up with my father collecting comic books, and he grew up during the Silver Age. So, but one of the cool things that happened in DC Comics in the Silver Age, the Justice League would have a annual crossover with the Justice Society. And at that point, there were different Earths. Now we're back to different Earths, but for a while there was not different Earths. But anyway, so the Justice Society was the heroes for Earth 2, but had happened during the Golden Age, so they were older at that point, and they would cross over, which is what actually got my initial interest in Golden Age comics, because the different Green Lantern, the different Flash, and older Superman, you have the weirdness of Batman dying on Earth 2 and Robin taking over and kind of combining the Robin costume with the Batman costume. If you go check the Silver Age Robin of Earth 2, it's bizarre looking, and every year the costume changed to something a little different. So, but I always found those really cool. So that got me interested into Golden Age comics. And then in the 80s, there was a great series, Roy Thomas, and I forget who else wrote it and drew it, but it was called the All-Star Squadron, which was taking place on Earth 2, telling stories of what was going on during World War II with a group of heroes. And you had the Justice Society, but a lot of them had volunteered to go over and fight the Nazis or fight the Japanese during World War II. So you had other heroes popping up. And what they did was they took other Golden Age heroes that they had rights to and formed a group. And then also you would spread in some of the Justice Society in that point. And I love that series. That and Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes were all my favorite DC comics at the time. I'm more of a Marvel guy, but that's what got me into Golden Age characters. That and Captain America I always really was into also. So those are some of the that's where I started with my trek down the Golden Age characters. So I've never been able to afford to go get Action Comics 1 or Detective Comics 27 or any of those big time comics. I don't have any real Golden Age comics in my collection, even though I'd love to add some of the minor characters. That would be really cool to find some of this stuff, but some of them are hard to find because the Golden Age started during the Depression and then World War II. So then you have that problem of a lot of times those comics weren't kept because during World War II, a lot of times comics were shipped off to the military men because that gave them a little reprieve. And it gave people just enough sense that, oh, I've got something of entertainment going on along with the radio where you didn't have to focus on the war. But those comics weren't usually taken care of. In fact, there are comics that are being found inside of old houses when they're doing demolition. There was an Action Comics #1 found a few years ago that had the cover torn off of it, but it was used for insulation in houses because that's what people would stick magazines and newspapers in the wall because insulation wasn't a big deal during that time. Plus, it wasn't something they could afford. So when they built a house, so sometimes these comics are found that way, which is kind of a cool thing. And that Action Comics went for over $1 million in that rough shape and inside of somebody's insulated house. Can you imagine? You're like, this old house isn't worth but 20 grand or whatever, it's falling apart, and then you tear it down, you're like, and I found a comic book that's going to make me $1 million inside. So anyway, so feel free to ask any questions, guys and gals. So that's kind of the history where I come from. I've been collecting comics all my life because, again, my father collected comics. Now, to his dismay, I became more of a Marvel guy because he was more of a DC guy. So we have that rivalry. And he's forgiven me, I think. And I think I did that a lot. I think I would find something he liked, but I would go with something different. Like the sports teams he liked, I usually picked a different sports team to root for, or the comic books, I would read something different. And the advantage I had was he would buy comic books. Come on in, guys. Come on in. Come join us. So he would read, he would collect DC so I could read those, and then I would collect Marvel because then I could read those on my own. So I got the benefit of both worlds. So for you guys just joining us, we're talking about Golden Age of Comics. You guys know what that is? You do? Okay. So Golden Age started in 1938. It is when we claim that it started. Of course, Superman premiered, and that really kind of spurred it on. Now, and most of the Golden Age heroes, other than the ones being used by DC and Marvel currently, are actually in public domain. So those are actually characters people can use, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a little bit. But and if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask, okay? Or if you got comments, or if you got a favorite Golden Age character, just tell me. I'm all cool with that. So 1938 to 1956 is typically what we think of as the Golden Age. Interestingly, there were comic books and heroes before the Golden Age. And some of them were very, very popular, and some of them actually spurred on some of the Golden Age characters. Tarzan from 1912 started in book form, was on radio, went to comic books. So Tarzan, this great character living in the jungle, the ape man.
Didn't Mickey Mouse do that too? Like, I know Mickey Mouse also had a lot of side comics when Disney first came out.
Yeah, they did. They did do a lot of comic books. That's correct. And of course, that was 27, I think. 1927. So you had the animated, and then you had comic books that came shortly after. Yes. So comics actually were around for a long time beforehand. A lot of times they were horror comics or humorous comics, but yes. But as far as heroes that we think of that might fit in kind of a superhero or something of that genre, Tarzan was really the first with 1912. You have Zorro in 1919, which actually Zorro is one of the inspirations for Batman. As most people know. In fact, in the original telling of his story, he and his parents were out seeing a Batman movie, and that's when they got killed in the alley. So
will they bring that back in the new movie, The Joker, too? When Batman's parents gets killed, if you pay attention to
yes, it is Zorro. You are exactly right. They do pay tribute to that. In fact, they actually made reference in the '89 Batman that it was Zorro also, and other things. So yeah. 1929, Buck Rogers came on the scene. Buck Rogers being a sci-fi hero, but had the backpack and had the gun. The Shadow from 1930, also another big inspiration for Batman. And the Shadow is a great character that's way underused. And wish they'd make a really good movie with the Shadow, because that would be awesome. Doc Savage, you guys know who Doc Savage is? Really, a lot of people don't. I only know it because he kind of came back in the 80s, which I know was a long time ago also. But he kind of came back in the 80s for a little while. But he's a golden skinned guy he's kind of like Indiana Jones, except for he's got some super enhanced abilities, and his skin's this golden color. It's actually kind of a cool, bizarre character. The Lone Ranger hit in 1933, which captured people's attention. Of course, the radio really brought in the Lone Ranger, but also that kind of masked hero kind of came along with that, because before that, Zorro and then the Lone Ranger had masks. And then Mandrake the Magician, who's some people contribute to being the start of the Golden Age, because he was the first one with true superpowers. I mean, the Shadow sort of has powers, but they're not really considered to be superpowers. But Mandrake the Magician has the ability to hypnotize people by simple looking and gesture, to levitate, teleport, and shapeshift. So he's one of the very first superheroes. We don't typically think of that as being the start of the Golden Age, but some people argue that he's actually the first superhero. We should start the Golden Age there. We have Green Hornet and Kato. Have you guys heard of that? Nope. There's a movie from a few years ago. Don't watch it. It's not worth watching. But there's an old television show that's actually pretty decent. It has its moments.
The car is good.
The car's great. So basically, it is a guy in a mask, kind of like Batman, but it's a green mask. And instead of being the good guy, he pretends to be a mobster. Him and his sidekick, who is a martial arts specialist, they go and they clean up the town by trying to take over the mob areas and trying to clean that up. And then how they're cleaning up is they're actually getting the police involved and doing all that, but they had this really cool car called the Black Beauty. So it's a cool, very Batman-esque character, other than instead of trying to put fear in the criminals because of the vengeance coming, it's the fear that this guy's going to come in and take over our business, basically, which is an interesting model. You have the Phantom in 1936. Have you guys heard of the Phantom? No? Okay, that's okay.
Hey, you're teaching them something.
I know, I'm hoping so. So the Phantom is this character in purple, and he's got these different powers. He's got a special ring. There's also a bad movie from the 90s, which I know is way before your guys' time, but also it's okay. But it could be, in today's day and age of superhero movies, these are things that they could do that would be really cool movies, because there are these characters that are classic characters. You would have to set it probably back in the 30s when it was happening for it to really make sense. So it would be a period piece. So the first solo female comic book character. Everybody thinks it's Wonder Woman. It's not Wonder Woman. Do you know what it is? No.
I know who you're talking about. I don't know her name.
Sheena, Queen of the Jungle.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, it is this character, kind of like Tarzan. She swings through the jungle. She's friends with the animals. She fights against people doing, cutting down the jungle and causing all sorts of problems in the jungle. So she's actually a very cool character. Another bad movie from the 80s made about her, but she's a really awesome character. But the very first female comic book led hero is Sheena. She inspired actually several other versions of female jungle characters afterwards. So if you look throughout different comics, you'll see different other female jungle characters that are supposed to kind of be like Tarzan, but also, they're female, cool, and they're usually wearing like a swimsuit sort of thing. It's often leopard print because, that kind of fits in. Now, her comics was interesting. When I was doing some of the research for it, her comics kept getting in trouble because it was too risque because of her swimsuit. So they kept coming down hard, and there would be people that would stop publishing or having her comic come out because it was too risque having a female doing all these manly things in the jungle in a swimsuit. It actually debuted in England in 1937. It came over to the United States in 1938 in Jumbo Comics #1. And she started every issue, because a lot of times these heroes had their own comics but didn't star in them because kind of went away from a lot of superhero stuff through 1953. So right before the Silver Age, she started in a comic all the way through from 38 to 53. Okay, so that's the priest. So those are the characters that happened before what we consider to be the Golden Age. Those are the characters that inspired a lot of the Golden Age. Superman was inspired by some of these characters. Batman was inspired by some of these characters. Wonder Woman, of course, is inspired by some of these characters. So you have all that heading off, and DC Comics, gets a couple guys that come in and say, hey, we've got a comic book for you. We're going to do this thing called Superman. All right. See you guys. Thanks for coming by. Hey, you're welcome. Come back. So you've got Superman coming out, which started the Golden Age in 38. Followed very quickly, you get Batman, and then Wonder Woman in 41, being like the first superhero female. Now, if you go back and read the early Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman comics, they're a little different than what we were used to on these characters.
And you note the point that Superman, the first appearance of Superman was actually a villain. Then it was something about conquest or something like that of the Superman, and it was this bald mastermind villain guy or whatever.
Yeah.
And
no, that's right.
Years later, then it comes out Superman. Same
right.
premise.
Right.
That made Superman did that.
Yeah. Well, and the history with that is really fascinating, because there is a whole bunch to that on why those guys created the characters the way they did. So yeah, no, I did know that, but feel free to jump in, because there's a lot of things I don't know. I'm up here because I really like Golden Age.
That's like the very first issue of Batman. I actually have 80-year collector
Yep.
book from DC that they came out with a couple years ago that has all of the major intros. And the very first Batman comic is pretty small scale. It's kind of like the Green Hornet. He goes up against these wannabe mobsters.
Right.
Scares the crap out of him. I think actually, yes, he does. He does kill one of them.
Right,
He throws him off the
kills
roof.
him. He carries a gun.
Used a gun back then. Yeah.
Right. No, you're right. He was okay with killing back then, and he had a gun. And nowadays we associate Batman as anti-gun because his parents getting killed. But that wasn't true at the beginning.
Yeah.
So the characters were very different. Yeah, Superman fought against a lot of normal people that were doing bad things. So he fought against corruption. He fought against people abusing their spouse. One of the very first.
They didn't really start bringing in like the rogues galleries until quite a bit later.
Yeah, it was.
I think that was because of the success of Batman doing it, because of Bill Figure's writing.
And I'm trying to remember who the first one was.
Would it be the Joker and Batman #1 would be the first?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But
I want to say that seems like the obvious thing, but I feel like there was
Lex Luthor may have been around before
that's
that.
what I was saying. The Joker actually doesn't come in the very first.
No, right. In Detective Comics, he doesn't come in until Batman gets his own comic in Batman #1,
which was years later.
And then he's only supposed to be a one-shot character.
To be a one-off, and he was supposed to die at the end.
Yeah, right.
And then for whatever reason, they decided against it.
I believe he died, and then they brought him back or something.
Like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
The funny thing is, in superhero comics, and we all know that.
No one's ever truly gone.
Right, especially, our villains. If the villain dies and you don't see their body afterwards, they're not really dead. And sometimes if you see their body, they're still not really dead. I can't tell you how many in the 80s Marvel team-up comics I've read, because that was one of my favorite things, Spider-Man teaming up with somebody. And at the end, almost always, the villain died, but you never see his body.
Well, I know in the case of the Joker is actually based off of what was a pretty big movie and pretty big novel for the time. It was based off of The Man Who Laughs.
Yes. You're exactly right.
Very sad.
Very sad.
It has a happy ending though. Which is weird for Victor Hugo, because Victor Hugo didn't normally do happy endings, but that one had a happy ending.
They may have kind of forced some of that. So with DC, so let's talk about DC. And there are so many characters for each of these that we can't cover them all. I went looking through a list trying to, and we can't talk about them all today. There's no way. And I don't know them all that well. I mean, some of them I know pretty well. And again, All-Star Squadron introduced me to a lot of those characters. But some of them I just don't know that well. Of course, All-Star Comics #1 was the first team-up comic book superheroes for DC. Justice Society, that's right. Justice Society of America was in All-Star Comics, and it did not star Batman, Wonder Woman, or Superman in the very first several issues. It starred Dr. Fate, Hourman, the Atom, Alan Pratt, so the kind of the tough fighter guy, Green Lantern being Alan Scott,
who wore red.
Right, exactly. But his ring was green.
Yeah.
And the Flash, Jay Garrick with the helmet.
Yep, the old Flash.
The old Flash, who I love. That Flash.
I love Jay Garrick.
Yeah, I do too. That character is one of my favorites. That and Johnny Quick. Johnny Quick. I love Johnny Quick.
Wasn't Black Cat part of the Justice?
Not originally. He became later.
Okay.
He joined later, but you're right. He did join. And of course, issue #8 is very big. It is the introduction of Wonder Woman joining, where she gets to be the secretary.
Yeah. Yes.
You're probably most powerful character of that whole group.
To take them all on by herself.
Right. Is going to take notes, which is very counter to the Wonder Woman comics of the time, because that was, yes, her side character, her secret identity did some of that, but those comics are bizarre and fun, and you can see why the censors are having some problems with some of it. And then there's the movie about his life, of him and his two wives, and that's a fascinating movie. Not for kids, but fascinating movie. So the second superhero group, because the JSA was very popular, was, anybody know? The Seven Soldiers of Victory.
Oh, yeah, just, I know one Justice League.
Nope, nope.
Go way later.
Not till the Silver Age, right? So this one starred the Vigilante, the Crimson Avenger, which we talked about last night, Green Arrow, and Speedy. So they did not join the Justice League, at least initially. They were part of the Seven Soldiers. The Shining Knight and Star Spangled Kid and Stripey. So
I forgot about him.
Yeah.
So
if you've watched Stargirl, you are familiar with who Stripey is, for those that have watched that series. But the misnomer was they weren't originally part of the Justice League. They became that later. Again, they kind of merged the two groups together. But originally, they had a separate group. So we're talking about the Crimson Avenger last night. So just a little bit about him, because it's a fascinating story. He premiered in Detective Comics number 20. So 7 issues before Batman. He wore a mask. He did a lot of the same activities. And he actually, when you look at him, other than the costume, basically it's Batman. They just kind of rebranded him for number 27 and to make him look more intense. So, but it's a fascinating character. Go look that up if you guys aren't familiar with the Crimson Avenger, because he's a very little used character. I haven't seen him in years in DC. Okay. DC has the rights to him, but yeah, he was a member of the Seven Soldiers. So, also in that same time period, DC had Plastic Man and Black Hawks. Now at that time, they were with a comic company called Quality Comics, which later folded, and DC quickly bought them up, and then they became DC characters that we now know. But those were 2 very big comic books. Black Hawks, Steven Spielberg is looking to make a movie, and our buddy Keith is super excited for this, because this is the movie he's wanted to see since he was a little kid. He loves the Black Hawks.
There's a new Crimson Avenger.
Yeah.
I think there is, yeah.
There is. It's the girl.
Yeah, I did see that, yes. There is. I don't think she's being used very much though. Now I'm not a huge DC guy, so I don't know what all's going on all the time on DC. Don't really even know what's all going on in Marvel most of the time. So
I don't care for the look.
So Marvel Comics at that time was known as Timely, and then later known as Atlas. But at that time they were known as Timely Comics. And Stan Lee came in while this was going on, so in the golden age, but he wasn't originally one of the writers. He was just doing some of the go-to work for the company. But they did have several major characters during that time. Of course, the best known is Captain America. But then you also had, which cover, well, this is interesting. Initial cover date was October 39, but quickly sold out. This character became so popular that 80,000 comics were snapped up like that. And so they did another printing, which is very unusual at that time, and did a second printing with the cover date of November 1939, and put a whole bunch more out to people. So if you think you have a Captain, or if you think you have a Captain America #1, you need to check and see if it's in October or November, because it would be a reprinting, which would make it not nearly as valuable. Now, I would be happy to have the reprint. So if somebody wants to give me the November 39 reprint, I'm happy to have that. So. Marvel also had other characters that actually came out before Captain America did. The Human Torch, well, part of it actually came out in a comic called Marvel Comics #1, which is interesting. They called it Marvel Comics #1, but it was for Timely. And then later, of course, it became Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics #1 had several heroes introduced, and I think they did that on purpose, trying usually very small stories, introduce the characters that they would go on with. You have Human Torch and Toro, which the Human Torch character and Toro are very similar to Johnny Storm from the Fantastic Four in powers, but they're not human, they're androids. So androids that can turn on fire and fly around. That's some cool technology, especially for 1940s.
And Human Torch actually had a cameo in Captain America First Avenger.
Yes.
When they're at the World's Fair, there's a like a glass cylinder looking thing that has a big red suited thing in it. That was a cameo by the original Human Torch.
Yes, it was. The Angel. Have you heard of the Angel? I'll see. There you go. You guys are better off me, because I had to go look him up, because I'm like, who is this? So he had no powers, kind of similar to Batman. Had no mask. He's the first hero like that had no powers, that did not wear a mask. And his identity was known to be a wealthy Thomas Holloway. So he was wealthy. It doesn't say how much. And of course, that changes because now a millionaire is not nearly as impressive as it was then. And billionaire is not nearly as impressive as trillionaire, all that. So, so you have that. So you have the Angel, which is kind of a cool character.
There's only one trillionaire, and if he could stay up in space, the world would be happy.
The also in the same comic, Namor the Submariner. So here's a character that we associate with the Silver Age.
Oh, I know who he is because he was part of what was that movie? It's a Sean Connery movie. It just slipped my mind.
Sean Connery.
Yeah, it was Sean Connery's last movie. It was the one that made.
Oh, the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yes.
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 And he's not. No, that's a different character.
Sure.
Yeah.
I thought it was the same one.
Yeah. No, it's a different character.
The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was Dark Horse, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, it was. So it's a different character, but similar. But yes. So Namor is basically it was Aquaman before Aquaman came.
Imagine if Spock lived underwater and had little wings on his ankles that let him fly around.
and it was
weirdest character ever.
Kind of a jerk.
Yeah.
So he was the first what we consider anti-hero comic book superheroes.
Yeah.
So he is one of those guys.
Been straight up villain before.
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
So,
especially he's rumored to be the villain of Black Panther 2
right,
coming up.
Right. Well, then that's because the Atlanteans don't get along.
Yeah.
So yes, I don't get along with anybody pretty much.
Right.
So basically Aquaman is a nicer version of Namor. Aquaman came later. And super strong, just powerful. One of the most powerful. He's considered to be the first mutant, is what they've rebranded him as. Of course, he wasn't called that back in the 40s when he came out in 41. But he's a very interesting character, to say the least. The comic also had the Masterator, which was a Western hero, and Khazar the Great, the jungle hero. They've adapted Khazar to now, basically, as they did with a lot of Silver Age. So Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman were all kind of adapted. You have different versions of Green Lantern and Flash when you went from Golden Age to Silver Age. They did that with Khazar. Khazar was very much just a straight jungle character. It was kind of a rip-off of Tarzan. Now they've made him living in the Savage Lands down in the mysterious section there of Antarctica, and made him a part of the XMen kind of family. So you've got that now, but he wasn't that way fully when he was introduced. Also, you have a character that was one of Stan Lee's very first creations, if not the very first one, called the Destroyer. It was also in that comic. He had enhanced super abilities and could shrink. You know what? I skipped over a whole bunch of stuff. No, maybe I didn't.
I'll be back.
All right. We'll see you soon. Okay. Now, what time is it?
It's about 11.
Okay, so we've got plenty of time. All right. Also in that same comic, I'm sorry. Also with Marvel, they introduced a character called the Wizard, which was a speedster, kind of a ripoff of the Flash, and Miss America, which was kind of a ripoff of Wonder Woman. And Superman, she had X-ray vision, enhanced stamina, could fly, super strength, and all of that. So she was kind of a ripoff there. They re-adapted her several times in Marvel Comics since then. Probably the biggest non-Marvel and DC character that we know from the Golden Age is Captain Marvel, aka Shazam. Don't get me started because he's always going to be Captain Marvel. For me, I don't care what you call him in the comics now. I'm not calling him Shazam because that's the magic words he says to transform. And in fact, that's how he defeats Black Adam the first time, is he tricks him into saying Shazam, and then he turns to dust because he's that ancient. And again, should have been a one-shot thing, and then they popularity of the character. But Shazam actually, or Captain Marvel, was actually more popular than Superman during much of the 40s. So his comics were one of the top-selling comics and usually outsold Superman, which is why DC hated them. And DC was really good about going in and had really good lawyers. They would go in and get people shut down if they thought their characters were too close to Superman.
Do the same thing that Disney does now.
Right, pretty much. If you do anything, they go in and shut down. DC's been doing that for decades and decades. So they got into a big law fight. Some of you know the story. It basically, it was one of these fights that the courts went back and forth. DC was suing to shut down Fawcett Comics and to shut down Captain Marvel. And Fawcett kept fighting it, and they would win, and they would lose, and they would keep going back to court and back and forth. That went on until basically the Golden Age ended. Superhero characters went out of fashion. More Western, romance, mystery, horror comics were the popular thing. So superhero comics weren't selling that well. And Fawcett was a much smaller company, so they kind of gave up at that point. Plus, then you had what was going on in Congress with trying to convince people that comic books were what's causing all the delinquents. You know, if your kids read comics, they're probably going to create crimes.
Essentially, the ancient satanic panic.
No, it was the satanic panic of the 80s, but happened in the 50s. There's a book written about it. A psychiatrist wrote a book about how he was linking. And again, you can correlate anything. I can tell you that in cities where country music is more prevalent, the rate of depression is higher. That's called the correlation. It doesn't mean that country music causes depression, even though it would in me. But it doesn't mean it causes depression in other people, but there's a correlation there. So they use this correlative study to say, well, kids that read comics, you know, the kids that are delinquents all read comics. Well, at that time, TV really hadn't became a big thing. It was just starting. Most people couldn't afford a television. You had radio programs. So kids that had money, and you know, it was during the 50s, kids had a little more money than they did in the 40s with the Depression. You had the booming of technology. Fathers are going off to work, and they were bringing home a little more spending cash and had a house. And so kids are buying comics all the time. So yeah, of course, kids that were delinquents were kids that read comics, but not everybody that read comics was a delinquent. So, but yes, that happened in the 50s and basically shut down the Golden Age. And then the Silver Age happened a little bit afterwards, where they started reviving superhero comics. But yes, so Captain Marvel is one of the great characters of the time. In fact, one of the only ones, he was basically the start of having a family. You think of the Batman family, the Superman family in comics, that actually started with the Marvel family, because you had not only Billy Batson becoming Captain Marvel, you had Captain Marvel Jr., who would say the name Captain Marvel, and which is my problem with Shazam. You can't say his own name because he couldn't. Captain Marvel Jr. couldn't call Captain Marvel. He had to call him CM, or would call him. He was also known as the Big Red Cheese, which I don't know why that name stuck. But so you know, so you've got that. You got Mary Marvel that had superpowers, so he was able to give. And I think the new movie is going to really show that. I know it showed a little bit in the Shazam movie, but how he was able to give those powers around to his friends and give them powers. He had a crazy uncle that had no powers but would dress up, and they had a giant rabbit, Hops. I don't know. I mean, it was the 40s, and but it was very popular.
I think part of why it's popular is because compared to other comic books and other superhero comic books, it had much more of a comedic effect.
Oh, it did. You're right. You're exactly right. Because some of especially the DC comics, were very dark, especially in the beginning. You know, they lightened up when Batman introduced Robin. That kind of lightened up that character, and we'll actually talk about that. A lot of these characters have sidekicks. So you know, Captain America had Bucky. For those of you that think of the Winter Soldier, that came much later. Originally, Bucky was the teenage sidekick. Somehow it ended up in World War II with Captain America, and they would pretend to have identities that nobody knew that Steve Rogers was Captain America in the comic books.
If I remember the story correctly, isn't that because Bucky follows Captain America?
He does, yeah, he does. Right, he does.
Stows away,
but they then allow him to continue to be there. Where nowadays, if you stow it away, you get sent back to your parents or get something. No, not then. Like, okay, well, you're over here. Let's go ahead and use you to take on the Nazis because, you know, they're machine gun fire. That won't affect you. Yeah. You don't have any powers, but don't worry about it.
You don't have to worry about the grenades or.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Just dive on it. It's fine. No, and that's, you know, that's comic books in general. I mean, yeah, our heroes, we want them to not be killed with guns. And if it means they're bulletproof, like Superman, or if it means they can deflect bullets like Wonder Woman, or if it just means that they're fast and good.
And have horrible guns.
Right. Well, and you know, if you're scared to death, like you were with Batman, or Spider-Man will zip you up in webs. I mean, we do all sorts of things to prevent that. And Spider-Man can dodge it with his danger sense. So yeah. So some interesting, there's some notable female characters that came out of the time, because we talked a little bit about Wonder Woman, we talked about Sheena, and there's some other ones out there. There's one called the Blonde Phantom, which was a very popular female character. Golden Girl, which is an interesting character. Namora, which is basically one of the first female versions of a male hero. So she's actually the cousin to Namor, the Submariner. She's just a female version and more friendly than him. She's not as cynical and controlling, much more likely to be hero. A character called Sun Girl, Venus, Millie the Model, the Phantom Lady, who I'm very familiar with because she was also used in All-Star Squadron a lot. And of course, the one that we now would probably more recognize more than others is the Black Canary. Come on in. I know you're busy.
I'm just saying hi.
Hi, CJ. So, all right. So those are notable female characters. Some other characters of note is Olga Mesmer, the girl with the X-ray eyes. She had X-ray vision, and her character premiered before Superman, like 2 years before Superman, 37. And she was a comic strip character. So she wasn't actually in the comic books, but she was a comic strip character. Only lasted about a year in the comic strip, but she was the first character that we know of with X-ray vision. We have Black Fury, or also known as Miss Fury, which was a big-time hero at the time. Interestingly, she dressed up in a cat suit. She had no powers, so she was kind of like Batman. But when she put on the cat suit, it gave her increased strength and speed because of the skin-tight cat suit, and because her uncle had previously been a witch doctor in Morning. And I'm like, well, how did the skin tight on her fit the same way as it did on him? I guess it's magical, so it works.
Yeah, that's one of those things you just don't ask questions.
And again, that was another one that would get in trouble with the censors, and people would drop it because a female in a cat suit doing all these great things. You have a female in a male world dressed seductively, so that had problems with, people would have problems with that one. So, especially in the 40s.
Well, isn't that why Catwoman became so popular? No. Because she was one of the few that was allowed because she was a villain?
Right, because she was a villain, right. That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. And of course, they kept her sexiness appeal way down in the beginning. Later, ramped it up when it became more acceptable.
Oh, and that was partially thanks to Eartha Kitt and the TV show, if I remember correctly.
Meow. Yeah. The Batman television show had great Catwoman. All three of them were amazing. So, the Blue Bolt was a character. Basically, it's an interesting character. He ended up getting struck by lightning twice, which caused him to be studied by scientists and experimented on. Which, of course, it's the 40s. That stuff actually did happen. So you had weird experimenting tests on people, shooting them full of all sorts of things, and he gained powers to shoot lightning. The first character that was known to shoot lightning. He went over and fought in World War II. So in the comic books, he was actually on the front lines and doing things, kind of like Captain America was at one point. So, but that was notable because a lot of the heroes still stuck around in the U.S. This is one of those characters that went over like Captain America did. Also had a gun that shot rays. So he could shoot rays out of his hand, but he also had a gun that could do it. I don't know why. There's a character called the Doll Man, which is our first character that was able to shrink. He could shrink down to 6 inches, but maintain his strength and endurance by doing that. This was before Ant-Man or the Atom could shrink. Originally in Quality Comics, but Quality Comics, of course, went out and DC bought them. So he became a character in that. In the 70s, and then later, he became a member of what was called the Freedom Fighters, which were some of the other Golden Age characters like Uncle Sam, and Phantom Lady was in that also, and some others. The bomb. Well, I didn't write it down. Anyway, but several other characters. And basically, they were stuck in a world where the Nazis had won, and they were still fighting against the Nazis. And there's a character called Moon Girl from EC Comics. And interesting thing with her is she had a secret identity as a junior high history teacher, which I found fascinating. Like, that's the way to go. And her comic book name, it started off as Moon Girl the Prince. In issue 6, it changes to a moon, a girl, ... romance. Or I'm sorry, issue 9. And then in issue 13, it just changes to weird fantasy. Like, okay, well, even if people want to read this, you keep changing the name of the comic book on her. There's a character called Captain Triumph. Captain Triumph. His character is interesting because he gains powers after his twin brother dies. His twin brother dies, and the ghost of his brother is able to give him super abilities, including invisibility, flying, and almost invulnerability. So I don't know how that works, because that's not typically how you think of ghosts, but hey, my ghost is going to come join me, and now I'm going to be able to turn invisible and fly and almost be invulnerable. There was a character during the time called the Jester. The Jester is like what it sounds like. It's basically, he's a cop who realizes that as a cop, he's not putting people away that he wants because of corruption. So he becomes a costume superhero, and he finds out that his lineage is a family of descendants of court jesters. So he dresses up like the court jesters, uses toys to disarm people, uses jokes. So think of the Joker, but as a good guy. And of course, his hero was his comic book company was bought out by DC, and then they shelved him because apparently he's too close to the Joker. So those are some notable heroes. Back in 2008, small company called Dynamite Comics created a comic called Project Superpowers, which I love. This also got me into some other characters that I did not know that were Golden Age. Because what it did was it took all these Golden Age characters that were public domain. Because if you have not been used, you end up in public domain. And then, or even after a certain amount of time, you end up in public domain, even if you are used, unless you have a special dispensation for that. So all these characters were public domain characters. And so they made a comic book bringing all these classic Golden Age characters into. It's actually a really cool story. Project Superpowers, the first miniseries was amazing. The second one was good also. They had a whole bunch of side things, and they kind of basically too much of a good thing. You're like, okay, well, I can't collect everything you're putting out here. Some of the characters, the American Spirit, the Arrow, the Black Terror, which the Black Terror is an interesting character because he wears black and has a skull. And he's basically Superman, but he can't fly. And he's got a sidekick also with the same abilities. But he doesn't have the personality of Superman or Captain Marvel. It's more of these guys deserve to be hurt, but I'm going to try to restrain not to kill them. What if I do too bad? So it's an interesting character just because it's a different take on Superman and Captain Marvel than we're used to. The Claw, the Crusaders, the Death-Defying Devil, which was actually the original Daredevil, but it was DARE-devil in the original comic. And because of trademark issues, they renamed him the Death-Defying Devil. Interesting acrobatic character, just kind of a bizarre character. Dynamic Boy and Dynamic Woman, the Fighting Yank, who very much is his flag flying character, reminds you kind of Captain America, but more of the personality of Captain Marvel with it, that he's very optimistic and yeah, we're doing this for the good, and the country's going to do all this good stuff.
Okay,
And
the question is, how delusional is he? Is he like Peacemaker, where he takes it too far, or
he isn't that level. That's a great question, because he doesn't take it to the level of Peacemaker, because Peacemaker takes it way to the other extreme. But no, but he is it's one of those where you meet those people that are super patriotic, that believes the country can do no wrong. And I love our country. So I'm not, if you're watching this, don't hate on me because I don't love our country. I very much love our country. I think our country is great. We've got things to work on, but I think we live in an amazing country that has a lot more freedoms than other places. But this guy takes it to the nth degree. And this was, of course, long before the days of the resurgence of the extreme patriotic movement. I think I said that, okay. The Flame, the F Troops, which is, and basically they were designed, the F Troop is going off a design of a Frankenstein monster, but it's kind of like these kids with this Frankenstein. It kind of reminded me of Frankenstein Jr. Do you remember that? It was a cartoon from, good Lord, cartoon from the 70s. So anybody watching this probably has no idea. All right, Lady Satan.
her? I vaguely remember.
Yeah. Green Llama, Hydra, Masquerade, which is a fascinating female character, Mr. Face, the Owl, Pyro Man, Samson, who's what it sounds like. It's supposed to be the biblical Samson, who can't cut his hair or anything else. He's super strong. So I think it was the take on a Hercules kind of like character. The Scarab, the Supremacy, the Targets, V-Man, and the Woman in Red, which is a really cool character also. So those are ones that they brought back. And they did it in a very interesting way because they had a story going, and so they kept bringing in characters to match the story. And so you would jump between this character and that character. You really got an introduction to some of these Golden Age characters. If you, hopefully this helps some of you guys to get to know a little bit about Golden Age characters, all the stuff that's out there. We have barely touched what's out there, what happened. Because you understand the Golden Age, when Superman came out, people went, this is going to make money, because Superman was immensely popular with issue #1 of Action Comics. So it basically got people thinking, we need, because the comics at the time were either sci-fi, or they were Western, or mystery, or something like that. Sometimes you did have stuff like Zorro, you had stuff like, anyway, those characters we mentioned earlier, you had those characters out there, but Superman really kind of ratcheted things up. And this is during the Depression. So you had the weird time of, some people couldn't afford the 10 cents for a comic, but the kids that could afford it, that was their escape away, again, as we talked about. So it just blew things away with Superman. So everybody rushed out to put out heroes. And a lot of them were knockoffs of Superman. So DC wasn't wrong in a lot of that. I would argue that DC is wrong about Captain Marvel, because his character is completely different personality-wise. Some of the same powers, but more magical based and very different. But I know eventually they were ruled that they were too close. And there's a whole other story that goes with that. But you see that, but a lot of these characters go away very quickly if they didn't catch on. Publishers did not keep putting things out, and they don't nowadays. So we're back in the 80s and 90s. You have a character that wasn't as popular, they would put the comic book out. And if you had a cult following, then you were okay. They were okay with that as long as they were making some progress in sales. They didn't have to be busting. During the 40s and back today, if you're not at the top of the list, your character's probably not going to last very long. So you have all sorts of really cool, interesting, bizarre characters that do weird, crazy stuff. And one of the things with the Golden Age that was different than what you see the Silver Age, the Silver Age really became about technology and science. All the characters were basically based out of that. You see that both in Marvel and DC, that there's a science base to it, even though it's a radioactive spider that bites Spider-Man. Well, the radiation happened because of a science experiment. So it's sort of based on science. Most of the characters in the Golden Age were magic based. Green Lantern's ring is magic at the time. You have characters that come up with magic words that give them powers. You've got all sorts of stuff. You have, of course, Wonder Woman coming from the mystical land of Amazons. It's all magic based there and given powers from the gods. So a lot of it was God based. Dr. Fate is a magical character that's really well known and going to be in the new Black Adam movie with part of the Justice Society, which I'm super stoked for. But his powers are all magic. Comes from a Lord of Order to fight against the Lords of Chaos. So when you look at the 40s, magic was really the focus. When you hit the Silver Age, it becomes much more about technology. Now, with the Bronze Age and then the Modern Age, or whatever we're calling it now, Postmodern Age, I don't know. Things have become more of a mixture. You can have a mix there, but it's really interesting because it's very distinct between the Golden Age and the Silver Age, that the Silver Age really wanted everything to be science-based, even though most of what Stan Lee was talking about, the science was all completely made up on the spot. And he'll tell you that, or he has said that on record. Of course, he can't tell you that now unless you do a seance, I guess. So any questions? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you if you're out there watching on the live stream. We will call it time and have a fantastic Sunday. And if you're watching this later, have a fantastic day. And check out some Golden Age characters. And if you find some in a comic shop or for sale, grab them up because they're fascinating things, even if they're not worth much. And you may actually find a gold mine if you find something that you don't know what it is. So, all right.